With the panel there about the story that I broke here on Sky News last night and wrote about in the Australian today regarding the ABC and their diversity survey. This is creating a lot of consternation around the country today. Talkback Radio is talking about it, and why not? Because the ABC surveyed its on-air staff. It was an optional survey, apparently. It came out in this email, and it said, "We need you to please provide us with some information about yourself, including things like your ethnicity, gender identity, sexuality, and what languages you speak." The survey closed off on Friday. Some staff said they were happy to fill it out. Others were disappointed. Others just said they didn't know about it. But I want to find out more about this sort of survey, whether we can all expect our employers to ask us about this sort of stuff. I'm joined by Luis Izzo, who's the Managing Director of Sydney law firm Australian Business Lawyers and Advisors. Thanks for joining us, Luis. First up, a lot of big businesses have diversity targets, so they do some sort of surveys. But does this one strike you as unusual?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris. Look, it isn't uncommon to see surveys about people, languages they speak at home, about national or ethnic origin, things like that. And we absolutely know that gender-based statistical surveys about trying to understand the quotas about having a certain number of genders represented in various positions is quite common. This survey is in the same nature, although it does have a few additional elements. It does talk about sexual orientation, which is not something we've typically seen in these types of surveys. We do see big corporates do surveys of this nature, but probably not as wide-ranging as the one that you've reported on in relation to the ABC.
If you were advising a corporate firm that was doing some sort of a diversity survey within its staff members throughout its organisation, would you advise them to include a question about sexual orientation?
That's a good question. I think there's two things I'd say in response to that. The first thing is, generally speaking, it's really good to know as much about your workforce as you can in terms of collecting information, whether it's about this type of topic or anything else. Where the danger arises is what you do with the information once you collect it. And that's what people are worried about. Is it's okay to try and understand statistical information about your workers, where they've come from, what they might do outside of work, but it gets dangerous if you're seeking to then do things after that, or there's consequences associated with the information that you collect. So the first thing I'd say is collecting the information isn't necessarily the worst thing or problematic. It's what someone might seek to do with the information that's the problem. Now, to come to your question, I think the only advice I would give is, as long as they don't treat anyone adversely, there's nothing unlawful about asking for this type of information. But any corporate would need to think about the industrial and cultural ramifications. Will it make people a bit concerned, or seek to effectively cause discussions in the workplace about why they're after this information, what's going to happen with that information? And unless you've got a good comms plan in place to explain exactly why you're after this type of information and what you're going to do with it, it's more cultural and industrial ramifications as opposed to legal ones that you'd be concerned about.
What about if, as an employee, I felt pressured to fill out the survey? I was worried that even though it's optional, that there'll be some IT record that I didn't complete the survey, and therefore there's a black mark against my name? And what about just the fact that I feel pressure from my organisation to share with them my gender identity or sexual orientation? Isn't that unhealthy in a workplace?
Well, that comes down to how, again, you communicated. I do understand that the survey was voluntary in the sense that you didn't have to complete it. And so what you would want from an organisation is that the messaging from managers is consistent with that people don't need to feel compelled, and that the information will be protected. And most importantly, from a discrimination law perspective, that no one will be treated adversely for either filling out or not filling out, or for what they put. But I suppose, to come more directly to your question, you cannot necessarily prevent or ensure that no one's going to be in some way offended or somewhat put out by this type of questionnaire. What they've done isn't unlawful. There's no doubt about it. There's nothing legally wrong with it. Again, you just need to be weighing up, am I creating the right kind of conversations around the water cooler in the office, Or if I really do want this information, am I communicating it to the workforce in such a way that everyone understands why I'm collecting it, why it's good for us to have this data, and that everyone's going to be protected?
So, Lewis, why are they collecting it? Aren't they just collecting this information so that they can put in diversity reports into their annual reports and satisfy shareholder activists or the like? In other words, tick a few diversity boxes, do a bit of corporate virtue signalling, and they're putting their staff through all these privacy concerns just to do that.
That's probably the most likely reason. That is that they're probably seeking to report on the nature of their workforce. You can't help but think, though, that once someone has a statistical breakdown of the various attributes and backgrounds of their workforce, the question that necessarily follows is, well, do we want to promote greater participation by certain groups that might be underrepresented? I mean, that's the question that begs out of any of these types of surveys. And there are laws in Australia, both the Racial Discrimination Act and Sex Discrimination Act, have provisions that actually permit companies and permit natural persons to effectively positively discriminate. What they talk about is special measures, and the laws permit organisations to take special measures to increase representation in their workforce of underrepresented groups. So
Thanks,
there's actually
Lewis.
a law.
Thanks, Lewis. Sorry to cut you off, but we are right out of time. I appreciate that. It's a very, very important point.